This is going to be really advanced content stuff. What you're about to hear is the recording of a call not just to the Online Trainer Mentorship, but to the legacy group for the Online Trainer Mentorship. So these are people who have already completed the initial 12 weeks, and they decided to stay on for at least another year. We're honored that so many people choose to do that. It's the biggest compliment anybody can give to our work, to our program, is that after they've already signed up, after they've gone through it, they said, yeah, I want more of this. I'm having so much success. This call got really, really deep into content theory, into the tactics of what you post when, and most notably, how you actually design your content in advance with the output that you want, conversion, whatever, right? So have a listen to this call, and I really hope that it helps. This is to a very, very high-level group of trainers, influencers, gym owners as part of the Online Trainer Mentorship. Even if you're not at that level yet, there's going to be a lot of pieces that you're going to be able to pull out and use for yourself. There's a lot of really juicy kind of tactical bits. Without further ado, here's the call. Hope it helps. So we're talking about content strategy here, but specifically we're talking about like high-end content strategy. And I want to start, as I often do, much more sort of theoretical. And then as I get into that, because I think that context is very important of how I think about these things, after I talk about that, I want to get into much more tactical. And we could talk definitely, Will, about what I call like talent scouting, basically. Once somebody is already a big deal, it gets very, very hard to reach out to them. But if a lot of my career has been predicated on identifying the type of person that has a pretty good odds of becoming something pretty special in the years to come, and adding value to them and building relationships with them and being the first person who publishes them or whatever, like very, very early on. And that's what I've been doing for the last decade plus, and that's what I still do to this day, not to the same extent, but that's what I still do to this day. So we will get into kind of talent scouting as well. And then specifically like what I want to end it on. So I want to talk about the theoretic overview of like how I think about content and how I split my time with it, because there's always this existential kind of fear of like, oh, if I'm doing this one thing and focusing on it, like I'm failing somewhere else, and that sucks. And so how I think about those kinds of things, to the specifics of how I try to formulate each post and tell stories and stuff like that, then down to actually what I'm going into now, which I'll give you guys kind of a sneak peek and how I'm going to be structuring stuff moving forward. I spent a lot of time last week with Ryan Holiday, if anybody knows him, and spent a lot of time with him, but also was able to ask him a lot of questions about how he does what he does, and how he gets so much content out. And it's actually fascinating how he does it, and it's something I'm going to be starting to do. So he basically modular in a modular way creates his content, so it can be reused over and over and over again in different ways. And it's really, really a brilliant way to leverage yourself. So talk to you about that. And then we'll get into like converting traffic from content, because at the end of the day, that's what, I mean, building a big audience is fine. But there's a lot of people with big audiences that are pretty worthless. So converting traffic, and that might be traffic to anywhere else. For me, it's largely converting traffic to our podcast right now is where I'm doing it. If you follow me on Instagram, you've seen me do it probably. And I'll talk to you about kind of how that's working. And it's working phenomenally well, both to grow the podcast, and also we're booking more calls than we've ever booked using basically that one story that's promoting the podcast. So I'll talk to you about how we're doing all of that and the behind the scenes and stuff of how that works and who's doing it as well. And so actually, let me get in here. I don't think I can show insights on here, can I? No, I can't, but I can show you them in the note. Okay, very cool. So the first thing, I had to give this a name, because if you're a guy on the internet, you've got to give your processes a name. And so I'm going to call this the leapfrog effect. The way that I'll describe how I think about what I do at any point in time, and this is both for knowledge acquisition and for content, what I'm focusing on and business and everything, is I think about it in terms of like the homeostatic set point of the body. And so if you're familiar with the homeostatic set point, basically the way that our bodies work is that we have a set point that we're at, call it physique wise, and the body becomes comfortable at that point. It actually takes a significant amount of effort to get to the next level of fitness, or a significantly different amount of inactivity to fall out of that level of fitness. Whereas at the same time, once you've fallen out of fitness, to get back to that set point that you were already at one time is actually way easier than getting there in the first place. And so physiologically, muscle cells are multinucleated, the only cell in the body that has multiple nuclei in it. As you work out, you deposit more nuclei in the same muscle cell. And what's interesting is that as the muscle cell atrophies because of inactivity, the nuclei still stay there. So the genetic material still, I don't need to tell you guys this. You all know this, but that's how it works. And so then when you start training again, you get back to that level quicker. Okay. And that's why before and after photos are largely a sham, because a lot of the time that person was already fit at one point, and then, you know, they're not getting there for the first time, and it's a very different thing. But business works the same way. Content works the same way, where once you're at a certain level, it actually becomes relatively easy to maintain that level. What's hard is getting there in the first place. And it requires not a long period of kind of diluted efforts. Actually, what I've found is that it requires a very, very specific, short, intense burst of effort on one specific thing and one specific goal and one specific outcome. So that's why I call this the leapfrog effect, where I'll take usually give or take 30 days, depending on what it is. It might be a little bit more, it might be a little bit less. Well, I'm focused on one thing, and I found that that's worked best. So for knowledge acquisition, I'm like, I want to learn a lot about artificial intelligence and how it's going to redefine job roles. Okay, I'm going to take 30 days, and that's my focus. And I'm going to gain an 80-20 knowledge of that thing. And then I have that, and I deposit that, right? And as the world keeps moving, like, I've got that foundational level of knowledge that I can then assess things. Well, it's the same with content. Like, I'm going to take 30 days, and I'm going to focus purely on viral growth right now. I'm not going to focus on converting via content. I'm not going to focus on depth. I'm not going to focus on storytelling or on converting, on anything like that. I'm just going to focus on viral growth. Like, I'm just going to increase the numbers. Because at the end of the day, an account needs to really, an effective account for business needs to really include 3 types of content. You've heard me talk about this, which is viral content, value content, and depth. So I'll talk about value and depth first because they're quicker. Depth is stuff about you that others are going to connect with you on. Little quirks, like I talk about, like I'm not wearing it, but like my Casio watch, or pineapple on pizza, or who's the guy that everybody pays attention to, Hormozi, talks about, like, he does his like never skip dessert, right? Like this guy basically just read every single book about creating a cult and just like has followed the steps. And so he knows that that's the thing. And so what is the thing about you? That's the depth. Is one thing ideally that people are going to encounter over the course of their day or their week in their natural patterns. And can you insert yourself into their mind share at that point? Perhaps the best example of this in the fitness industry is Ben Patrick, knees over toes guy. I can't walk backwards and not think about him. How often do you walk backwards? And so there's people who do this with like a glass of wine. With me, I talked about key lime pie for a long time, and then I decided I didn't like key lime pie as much. But when you're talking about depth, it's those little weird, quirky things. And then you just keep revisiting it. Because all you're trying to do is you're trying to, make a connection that's deeper than what you do. But also what you're trying to do there is you're trying to insert yourself into the conversation to gain additional impressions in mindshare. And you earn them, because impressions are really valuable. Value is trying to help somebody take one step in the direction that they want to take. A lot of people with value try to do too much. When we're talking about content, we're talking about basically front-facing, superficial, top of the funnel content. which effectively means you're going for the lowest common denominator in the biggest amount and the biggest number. Okay. Middle of the funnel, once somebody's already listening to you, that to me is like the podcast. Like, all right, now we can talk about context and nuance and what this really means. And you bought in, you're listening to me a little bit more. Superficial on social media, like it is, I got to hook you when you're on the toilet, like basically. And so all that I'm trying to do there in value posts is help you make one positive action to help give you a little bit belief in yourself that you can do this thing. A lot of what we do for our clients is we help them achieve something that they have probably tried and failed or tried and succeeded and then relapsed multiple times. And so what they're missing is not information, it's belief in oneself. And so a lot of what you can do with that first step is something that's very, very quick to give them a little bit more energy, to help them sleep a little bit better that night, to connect a habit a little bit better that day. So this is why things like metabolic finishers after a workout, or smoothies, or a sleep trick that they can do to sleep a little bit better that night, like those types of things work really well on front-facing content, because it's all about this idea of belief. Okay, so that's value. And then if you can help them believe that they can achieve this thing, well, who do you think they're going to look to move forward? And then you get into viral, and viral is how you grow an account. And the thing with viral content, and this is the phase that I just came out of. So I did 30 days where I was like, okay, I'm just going to post basically statements that I know that the type of person who likes this type of material, who's right for me, already agrees with. The reason why people share things is an act of selective self-representation. They share things because they're things that they already believe or want other people to know about them, or ways that they want to appear in the world. And most people out there, we live in a bubble. Most people out there, I had the stats at one point, I don't anymore. Most people out there do not create their own material, but they still want to be heard, and they still want to share, and they still want to show off. And so what they do is when they find something that basically satisfies what they already think, they share it as an articulation of their own thoughts. And so what you're doing when you're trying to create viral materials, you're basically just trying to figure out, what do the type of people who are right for me already think? How can I repeat that? And the real gold are things that I call it people in the know to be true, and people not in the know are either misinformed or ill-informed or don't know about. Topics like women weightlifting. Like, we all know how amazing that is for every single possible reason. And yet, there's still a proliferation of damaging media around it. And so I'm always looking for those. So when you're thinking about messages, if you want to grow an account, you actually basically want to create things that people like you already think. So, so when I talk about this idea of the leapfrog effect, what I'm doing at any given time is I'm saying, this is my focus right now, and the other stuff doesn't matter as much. So for 30 days, I was like, my focus is to gain followers. Now, they got to be the right kind of followers, obviously, but my focus is to gain followers. If I don't convert as many customers during this time, that's okay. Now, on the flip side of that, there are different times when you say, my focus is to get customers. Well, you're not going to gain as many followers. You might even lose followers during that time. But that's also okay. The idea with this leapfrog effect is that you have very distinct, short, intense periods of times with a desired outcome for that period. And you're okay with the other stuff not working as well. Call it, you're putting it on almost like autopilot during that time. So Will, you asked about basically building a network. Well, it's the same kind of thing. I've always tried to find, as I said in the beginning, I've always tried to identify people who had kind of the requisite skills or like makeup. And it's just like, yo, there's some good shit here. Like, I don't know what it is, but there's something here. Either this person seems to have this weird combination of skills or whatever it is, or they just seem like the type of person who's going to go the extra little bit. Allison and I did a road trip many years back. This is before kids, but we did a 48-day road trip across Canada and the United States. And we hit 16 national parks and monuments, and we hiked in them. And one of the things that overwhelmingly jumped out to me was that you'd get to like some of the most popular national parks in the United States, and you'd get there and the parking lot would be packed. And there's like always one pathway to like the major destination that's usually like wheelchair accessible, like 5-minute walk to, you know, the major, and it's packed and everybody's taking pictures. But then after that pathway, there's always like a little dirt path that's maybe another 30 minutes to another waterfall or to another whatever. Within 5 minutes of going on that second path, you got the whole park to yourself. And if you take that same principle and you look at what other people in your industry are doing, you look for people who are willing to walk that extra 5 minutes. It isn't actually that much. And I'll give you a distinct example of that. When I decided I wanted to get back into like basically showing my face again, after a couple years of hiding behind the company, it's a whole different story. I decided I wanted to reconnect with our community, but I also decided that I wanted to reconnect with people doing good things in our community and the type of people who were maybe possibly going to be big deals 5-10 years from now. Because that's what we did very early on in the PTDC, is we published the best fitness articles of the week every Sunday. And like the type of people at that point who were writing articles, well, no shit, those were like the Jordan Syeds of the world. I mean, it wasn't, you're 22 years old and you're writing a blog post that's 2,000 words 3 days a week, and you're doing that for 2 years straight before anybody notices. It's basically impossible for you not to be successful. And so you can identify those types of people and support them and share the work. And so that's a lot of what I did early on, was I talent scouted those people. And that's what I did when I wanted to reconnect with our community. I put out a call to our audience, our community, and I said, if you have a podcast, I'd love to be on it. I don't care if you create a podcast and I'm the first guest. I don't care if it's popular. I don't care how many listeners are on it. I'd love to be on your podcast, but I'm not going to be on your Facebook Live, and I'm not going to be on your Instagram Live. And the reason for that was simple. A podcast is not very hard to generate, but it requires you to walk an extra 5 minutes. And the type of person who has a podcast, and I said to this straight up to the people on it, they said, why are you doing all these? I did 75 podcasts in a month and a half. You know how much that sucks? It helped me really practice explaining what I did, for sure. But I said to people straight up, I said, I'm not on this podcast to access your audience. I want to get to know you. This was a way for me to have a one-on-one, eye-to-eye conversation with you to get to know you. Because what you've shown me in the sheer fact that you have a podcast, or even created a podcast so that we could have a chat, was that you're willing to go the extra 5 minutes. Once somebody already is popular, they got a lot of demands on their time. You might be able to add a lot of value to them in some way, but it's going to be very, very difficult. The reason why reputation and relationships are so valuable is because they're the one thing that can't be cheated. It takes time, it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of investment, but you can kind of hack it a little bit, Will, in being a talent scout and being there early for people that have shown that they're willing, either they have like something special to them or they've shown that they're willing to go a little bit extra. What I used to do on the PTDC is I'd go on people's websites and people who were writing articles, I'd look to see whether they had actually ever done anything substantive. Have you ever created an online product? Have you ever written a book? Even created a video course? Now, mind you, this was back in like 2012, 2013, where it was a little bit of extra work. Very few people ever did, but the people who did are the people who are popular and big names now. And the people who didn't, who were just writing their blog, a lot of them have left the industry. Or there are people who kind of still have a blog, you know, like you might know their names, but they haven't grown much since then. So if you want to be friends with people who are big deals 5 years from now, like Barbell Shrugged, how did I get on to Barbell Shrugged? I got introduced to them through Joe DeFranco, who I didn't know, but I had done Joe's podcast just beforehand. And I don't remember who I got introduced to Joe from, but I was basically like, hey, I want to do like a group of podcast appearances. And so I asked somebody who I knew from that time, who basically vouched for me to Joe. Joe had known of me. We had just never had a chance to meet. And then afterwards, I said to Joe, you know, I'd love to be on a few more podcasts. Can you think of anybody who you think I might be a good fit? And he introduced me to the Barbell Shrugged guys. Because once you know somebody in that world and they vouch for you, it becomes much easier to go beyond that. Anything else on that you think I should add? Will, does that answer your question before I get into more like the specifics of the content itself?
No, yeah, that was good. That was more than I could have asked for. I think I was spot on.
Thanks for giving me a chance to grab a cup of water. Let's just say the boys didn't sleep that well last night. Okay. Every single piece of content to me follows the same. I try to follow the same format. It's a 3-part format. You've probably heard some variation of this before. I look at it as hook, story, punch. You hear all the time in marketing speak hook, story, offer. I don't like using offer because the goal of content is not necessarily always to make an offer, like to sell something. So I talk about it as hook, story, punch. And what I literally do, I mean, I've got like piles of notebooks behind me. I'll literally write out at the top of it, like hook, story, punch, whenever I'm thinking of an idea, and I'll just have sections and I'll write bullets of what I'm thinking for each. So that way, when I go to write it, I can easily, like I'm filling in the blanks of those bullets. And so you could do that for a long form piece of content, and you could do that for what's called a micro story. And I'll talk to you about like a hook and a story and a punch in a moment of like what those things are. But there was a post, I think Jason mentioned it when he was like teasing this session. There was a post on my Instagram that went viral. It's 420,000 likes or 413,000 likes. I think it's reached just over 3 million people. And it's this one. Oh shit, where did my Zoom thing go? I'll share my screen with you here. So it's this one here. And my dad exercised every week since I was young. At 78, he plays with my kids on the floor while many of his friends are needing assistance. Fitness doesn't seem like it matters until one day it becomes obvious. Hook, story, punch in 3 sentences. Like that is this post. And when you think about it, this is the crux of every post you're going to make, because everything that you say, you want to find the story in every single case. So I don't always achieve it, but I try with every single point I want to make to find a story. So let's talk about storytelling really quick, and then I'll get into the hook and then the story a little bit more, and then the punch. I'm going to tell you the same thing 3 different ways. Okay. So the first way is on October 6th to 8th, I'm hosting a business summit that's going to be digital called the Obvious Choice Summit. Proceeds, 100% of revenue is going to charity. Okay, that's number one. Number two is on October 6th to 8th, I'm hosting a digital business summit. It's called the Obvious Choice Summit. You can register for free. 100% of all of the revenue, if you buy the recordings, is going to go to charity. It's going to support the Tyler Robinson Foundation that provides financial support for pediatric cancer. Okay, that's number two. Number three. A year and a half ago on Sunday night, Nova Kennedy, who's 5 years old, had a headache at dinner. Within 48 hours, she was in surgery for a full-blown brain cancer. 9 months and 5 rounds of chemotherapy later, her prognosis is good. But her family's financial situation isn't. Her mom couldn't work for 9 months. The loss of income created a lot of debt. At the same time, while the Canadian government does cover healthcare, it doesn't cover things like transportation to and from healthcare, comfort devices, and a host of other things. 1/4 of all families that have a case of pediatric cancer get put into such a dire financial position that they report never being able to get out of debt for the rest of their lives. So, on October 6th to 8th, I'm going to be hosting a digital business summit. 100% of all of the revenue, if you decide to buy the recordings, is going to go to support the Tyler Robinson Foundation in Nova's name, which provides financial assistance to families suffering from pediatric cancer. They all said the same thing. Which of those stories was the most powerful? And the key to effective storytelling is that there needs to be something very specific with that story. There's been a lot of research done with charities and charitable donations whereby they talk about like the stats, because what's interesting about that story is I actually said the stat, didn't I? I said 1/4 of all families that suffer from pediatric cancer are in insurmountable debt. Well, Nova's amazing. Her family's amazing. But you can't argue that her story is more important than 1/4 of all families that have to deal with this pediatric cancer. And yet, when I tell Nova's story, it is immediately more impactful than this major stat that's there. And these are very well established principles, and they've done a lot of research on charitable giving, where if they talk about one person specifically, then there's way more donations than if they talk about the overall cause, which is interesting because the overall cause also includes the one person specifically. So by definition, the overall cause has to be more important than the one person specifically. And that's, I can't remember the name of the cognitive bias, but it's if you look of the Linda problem, you can find the specific name. So when you're telling a story, you need to find a hero. With your content, you need to find a hero. A hero is an individual, is a person. Might be a client of yours, might be somebody who's representative of a client, a caricature of a client, but there needs to be a person you are speaking about. Now, at the same time, you can't have a hero without a villain. But a villain doesn't need to be a person. In fact, I actually hate the accounts that talk shit about other people in the industry. Yeah, sure, that dude spouting the carnivore diet is completely ridiculous. I don't care. Like, you're just giving him more attention by talking about how bad it is. It's self-serving for you, and you know that. You're building your platform by giving him attention by talking about how bad he is. You're actually making the problem worse, not better. So I don't believe in doing that. But if we revisit this post, well, at 78, he plays with my kids on the floor while many of his friends are needing assistance. The villain is not his friends. The villain is not being able to play on the floor with your kids when you're a grandparent. That's the villain. And I can't think of a more powerful villain than that. This fear that you're not going to be able to click Lego pieces into one another with your grandkid. Shit, man. That's the villain. So you can tell this stuff very, very quickly. Now, I mean, of course, this is probably the best I've ever told the story. So I'm cherry picking it. But my point is, you can tell these stories very quickly in micro pieces of content if you follow this format, right? Hook, story, punch, because the end of it is a punch in the throat. Fitness doesn't seem like it matters until one day it becomes obvious, right? Same thing. Boom, boom, boom. And as you get better at these stories, those are the principles to follow. That's, to me, the key to creating content is storytelling. Okay, let me talk about the hook. The only point of the hook is to get somebody's attention, which means you've got to meet them where they're at, which means that you've got to either meet them emotionally where they're at, or you've got to say something that they immediately recognize. Basically, it can't be any work for them to like process what you're saying in the hook. And so I'll give you an example. We wanted to promote a podcast episode in my Instagram story. I think it was last week, maybe it was 2 weeks ago. Some of you might have seen this. But the hook that I used was something like Elon Musk's prioritization secret. And what was interesting is that the podcast episode was actually about how it was episode 103, if anybody wants to listen to it, of the podcast, but it was actually about how what I found that we all do is we just accumulate like tasks and things to do over the course of our day constantly, and over the course of our days, weeks, months, but we never actually remove things. And so over time, these things just compound until we get to this point where we're just doing so much shit and we don't remember why we're doing it, but we're just doing too much. And so my only solution for this is twice a year, I just wipe my slate clean and wipe my calendar clean and start over. And I reprioritize everything. And so that's what the episode is about. The episode itself actually doesn't mention Elon Musk once. But when I was looking for the hook of this thing, it was like, okay, well, like Elon Musk talks about first principles all of the time. And this behavior is a first principle behavior, right? Imagine if nothing before here ever existed. Would we do what we're doing now? Well, the only way to really know that is to actually put ourselves in the place of none of this stuff exists. Okay, cool. So the hook is a name, is a recognizable name in this case, that is intriguing, and people know to identify with it, and people know what it means without any kind of thought. Now, what was interesting about the Elon Musk thing was just how many people like have strong opinions about him. Like, I don't have strong opinions about him. I don't care. He's a dude I've never met. He's a dude I've never met. Like, that doesn't matter. But also just like people's inability these days to disconnect how they emotionally respond to a person versus trying to learn something that they can take and like make their own and do better from that person. It's like, I don't think there's a human being on this planet that I agree with 100% on. So, do I agree with everything he does? Maybe, maybe not. I don't really have strong opinions, but I do think that there's a lot that I can learn from him to get better myself. But there was a lot of people who like talked to me about how evil he was. I was like, that's fine, whatever. You can still like take this from him and like get better and do your own good. So that was interesting. So the hook could be something recognizable like that, or the hook could kind of like call out what they're doing. And especially, I mean, in the case that I'll give you here, it's what they were doing is they were doom scrolling Instagram when they came across my story. Like, think about, I hate saying this, but it's true. Think about what emotional state a lot of people are in when they're consuming content on social media. It's pretty fucking negative, isn't it? they're not feeling so good about themselves. They're comparing themselves to others, or they know that they should be spending time with their kids or their spouse, and yet they're in this like dopamine doom scroll and they're feeling guilty about that. Yeah, Jonathan, they're looking for a quick hit. Like, they're not in a good emotional state. And so meeting them there is actually pretty powerful, because that's where they are. If you want to take somebody somewhere, you've got to meet them where they're at in order to take them along that path. And so another hook that I used a couple of weeks ago, this is actually, I think, our most successful one, was it basically called out the fact that a lot of people who are on Instagram looking at my story are thinking at the same time that they're working really hard on Instagram and not generating any business from it. And so the hook was something about how to convert leads from Instagram. And so again, the resource that we were sending them was how to convert leads from all sorts of content. It could be an email list, podcast, Instagram, whatever. But if I'm posting this on Instagram, I'm going to call that out because that's what people are thinking about right there. So when you're thinking about these hooks, I'm thinking about where somebody is physically. I'm thinking about where somebody is emotionally, and I'm meeting them there. And if I can't meet them there really effectively, I'm thinking about somebody who they immediately recognize. That makes them want to pay attention and basically look at the story to see whether the story makes sense or the story like appeals to them. Like I said, the story very quickly needs a hero, needs a villain. You can usually do that in 1 or 2 lines. And then there's a punch or a call to action, basically. And so the call to action, if I'm trying to push people to the podcast. So I'm saying, DM me if you want the link to the podcast, and I'll talk to you about how that works. But DM me if you want to, listen to the podcast episode, or DM me if you want this resource for, a bicep boost at the end of your workout today, or my favorite smoothie to have at breakfast with my kids to get a little bit more protein in, or whatever, right? Something very, very simple. Not DM me for coaching, because you're not going to get a lot of those conversations. But DM me for like this very simple thing that somebody can add in to their day. I remember I learned this very early on when I was doing one of the first things that I did when I figured I wanted to figure out online fitness marketing, was I found a bunch of other people, and I basically told them that I would market their products and build their thing for free for a profit share at the end of it, just as a way to learn. It was way easier for me to get a lot more reps into marketing stuff by taking established things and marketing them than it was to build the thing myself, because then I didn't need to build the product, right? And I learned very quickly from seeing all the data behind the scenes how much better programs and products sold that were additive to what somebody was already doing than programs or products that asked people to start something. So for example, a lot of people at the time were selling like a 12-week program, like a super detailed, like online digital product that was like 12 weeks of programming, all these videos, all this kind of stuff as like their intro offer. And none of those were converting well. And what I later learned is that it wasn't a money objection. It was a time objection. Think about what state you've got to be in order to buy that right now. It's not a $200 decision. It's right now, when I'm looking at this in this exact space, am I ready to begin a 12-week workout program that's going to require me to read this thing and work out 3 times a week or whatever? That is a massive ask. Meanwhile, there were products out there that were like 50 workout finishers, I remember, that just crushed because nobody needed to stop what they were doing. This was just something to help them do a little bit better with what they were already doing. And so as a front-end product, as a front-end offer, to be able to begin a conversation to go deeper, they worked much, much better. So that's why the DM me for coaching doesn't work anywhere as well as DM me for, and honestly, like, respond to some of these things. Like, we give you like a PDF cheat sheet. It's like a 1-page little PDF of, just like the script in the video or something. It's really not much. I mean, you could give like one recipe, and that allows you to just do it over and over and over again. Like 1 week, do a vegan smoothie. Another week, do a I don't know, low carb smoothie. Another week, do like you're just going to hit different people with different things, but it only has to be one thing. So that's your call to action at the end of it. Right? So the punch is if you want the content to spread and go more viral. The call to action is if you want them to take some action from it. So they both have value, but what you're going to use when might change. Let's put a pause there, and I'll talk about the specific process afterwards of converting people from, I found it works much better in stories than like actual posts, but converting people from there. But first, any questions on any of that? I feel like I just threw a ton at you. It's nice this is being recorded. We can go back to it, but while I take a sip of water too. It's always funny with this because everybody's nervous to ask the first question. Then once somebody does, every single person is like, I got some. What's up, Adam?
So I'm always kind of conflicted with this idea of really building out followers, as well as just like building out the ability to kind of touch base with your followers. And of course, like, you know, get them to eventually jump on a call. Like, in your perspective, does actually building your followers directly correlate to increasing the amount of enrollments or calls that you actually have? Because I've heard sort of like both sides, you know, you don't really need a big following. Should it even be important to build a following in the first place if that's the case? Or, you know, have you actually been seeing the data of, you know, seeing your following grow as well as the enrollment process or the amount of people you chat with increase?
Yeah, that's a very good question. To me, what I've seen is that it's not a following number. It's not an abstract number. It's how stale is your audience? So yes, when I put a push into growing followers for that 30-day period, we absolutely had an uptick in interest. But my audience had gotten pretty stale before then, because I had done far too much value where there was just no growth. And like, there's only so many things you could talk about. So like the people who are there have heard me talk about the thing over and over and over. So it was pretty stale. So introducing new blood created a lot more energy. Now, that's not a 2,000 versus 5,000 versus 50,000 versus 100,000 follower thing. To me, it's just every so often, I do think that you need to introduce some new blood to an account or a Facebook group or anything, to be honest. I mean, think about the communities you're in, like it can get stale. So that's what I've seen in terms of response. And then engagement begets engagement. And this is one of the keys to the stories and how we're doing them. So who here has seen me do the stories to promote the podcast episode on my Instagram? Some of you, okay. So once a week, I think we're going to do twice this week. I think we're going to do one tomorrow, actually. So check my story tomorrow. I think they're going to put one up. But once a week, Carmelina and then a few others, our team, basically like decide on a topic that we spoke about on the podcast that they're hearing about a lot from people in our community that they're struggling with. And they find the podcast episode. And I mean, I can show you exactly how we do it. I use Telegram. And what she'll do is she'll send me something like this. Okay. So she'll create a little PDF based off of the podcast episode. That's very, very simple. That's just basically like what I spoke about in the podcast episode. And then she'll give me like a initial response. And I'll go back in and I'll edit it up and stuff like that. So on the handout, just like there was a little mistake in the footer, you know, she did a good job with it. But then I rewrote the response based off of the hook. And then what I'll do is I'll create something like this. Can you see that? I can't see you all. This is all that it is, but this one actually isn't as good because this one doesn't have as good of a story, but some of the other ones better. I think this one will do fine, not great. But it's always got a headline, which is the hook. It's always got a little like story, like very, very quick kind of, I try to get some stat, I try to get some intrigue, something that's going to make them like feel like they're missing something if they are wanting to get better at this. And then the call to action, right? Which is reply to this story with a word, and I'll send you 2 things. So the link to listen, and then the cheat sheet with the 5 steps. And we do that because this is available on our podcast. So if they reply to our story, they get like a little bit extra in doing it. They reply to it. And then what happens is, let me find an example. Let me see. No, let me find an example. I'll find an example of my buddy that I basically was just like, yo, you don't need to answer this. Yeah, Jeremy. So, Jeremy responds. Okay. So he responds price raises for one of the ones last week. And then here's the script back. So this is Carmelina sending the script back, right? Hey, lots of people tell me they're nervous about this. If that's you, having a process helps. So at every step, this is actually a different point completely, but every step you need to sell the next step. So if I put up a story, the headline needs to sell the middle piece of the story. The middle piece of the story needs to sell the call to action. The call to action needs to sell the response. So everything you do needs to sell the next step. Once they respond, you still can't assume that they're going to take action. So your response needs to sell the next step. So in this case, the next step is we want them to actually like click on the links. So the response quickly sells the links again in a bit of a different way, right? And then we follow up with a quick question. Jeremy, you training anyone online now or just in person? And that's where the real key comes in. The question will often have to do with the upgrade. So for the price raise one, like when was the last time you raised your prices? Like something to begin a conversation with them. If it's like a smoothie, like, hey, you're drinking smoothies in the mornings now? You basically just like trying to have a conversation with them to see where they're at. And then very quickly, it's the same DM script as you ever have. This is just a different way to start a conversation with them using this giveaway. And you could do this. I mean, like I said, if you use the smoothie example, you could just do a different smoothie every week. You literally just like show a picture of your smoothie and be like, anybody want the recipe for this thing? and just follow up with like, hey, curious, what'd you have for breakfast this morning? Because 3/4 of the people are going to say, oh man, I just, I'm just, my nutrition is not going so good. Ha ha ha, LOL, whatever. Oh, I'm curious. Why is that? Right now, you're having this conversation with them. The other benefit and the reason why we do it this way versus just putting like a link in the story of saying like, so, the other way to do this, if you want to promote a podcast episode, which is what most people do, is they put like, they tease the podcast episode and they say, go listen here, or create like a short video of it. The problem is that if you put a link in an Instagram story, even if people click it, that Instagram story gets suppressed like mad because Instagram doesn't want you to click out. It also doesn't allow you to respond back to the person and begin this DM conversation, which really is your goal anyway. But also, and here's the key, when you get a ton of people responding to a story, that story's reach whoosh, goes way up. So on any story that I put out, I'll usually get anywhere from 5 to 7 to 10,000 reach on a story with a following of 200,000. So it's like 5%, not 2 to 4% basically, reach on a story. I will get 20 to 50,000 person reach on every single one of these. If you look at my insights, like my top 6 performing stories are all these which if you think about it is actually pretty incredible, that my promotional material that starts conversations for our business are my most successful pieces of content because they get so many responses. And then the content reaches both my audience, but then the content actually starts to reach an organic associated audience as well. If you look at the insights, it starts to reach people who weren't following me. So that's how we are, that's how we're promoting. I mean, you could do this to promote an email list, right? We're doing this to promote a podcast, but you don't even need a podcast or an email list. You could just have a giveaway that's just a PDF that you just send somebody a Dropbox file in the DM, and then follow up with a question. And now you're having probably more conversations than you could ever manage. In terms of how we do it, so Carmelina is having most of the conversations, but we use Telegram, and I like using Telegram for this type of stuff with our team, purely because the only thing that I basically use it for is like business stuff, and I don't have any notifications on it. So it doesn't interrupt like WhatsApp. I talk to my family, like text message, I talk to my family. So this way it's separate. I open it when I want to deal with it, and I close it when I don't. But she'll send me in here. So if you have a team member, if you're thinking about bringing a team member on, which I know a lot of you are, to help with DMs, she'll send me things to personally respond to. And so once a day, once every 2 days, what she'll do is she'll send me like, you know, either for you or what shall I say, you know, do you want to respond, whatever. And I'll sometimes give a response here to respond, or I'll go into the account and I'll go to the person and I'll send a personal response or a video or something like that. But that way, you know, she knows basically that her job is to book calls and engage people that way. But if they're asking anything that's either more personal or a question that she's not an expert in dealing with or whatever, she'll fire them in here, and that way I don't need to sift through the DMs all the time. We are at time. I have one more thing I want to talk about, which is the modular content. So I'm happy to stick around, but totally cool if you guys need to pop off. And this will go in the group as well. Anything on that before we move on to the modular type stuff? Jesse, please apologize to Carmelina for me. Did you have a conversation with her? Oh, you thought she was a robot? Yeah, she's getting better. She's actually very good at being conversational in there, but you have to be very short with your responses. And even if it's you, sometimes people will think it's a robot. Like even when it was me, sometimes people were like, ha ha ha, is this AI, or ha ha ha, is this a bot? And it's like, it never was. Like we're 100% humans in there. But I think people are just extra cautious, and they just assume that everything is a robot at this point. Like, nope, I don't use any robots. Any questions on any of that DM responding to booking calls to, I mean, it's the simplest system in the world. But the nice thing that I like about it is that you can just repeat it over and over and over again with different things, because the things can be really simple. I like using it for the podcast because I want to grow the podcast, but also the podcast allows me to just go much more in depth and build a relationship with people. Because once you listen to somebody's podcast, you feel like they're your best friend in a kind of weird way. I get like offended by people if I listen to their podcast all the time and then I meet them and they don't like immediately recognize me. I'm like, oh yeah, wait a minute. We've never met before in life ever. But that's just shows you how powerful it is. Okay, we're gonna move on to the last piece then. Cool. I will preface this by saying this is the part that I am figuring out. I have not figured it out, but we're working on it. And so I get overwhelmed a lot of the time with content where I wake up in the morning and I'm like, oh, what am I going to create today that's going to impress people, right? And then I look at people like Ryan Holiday, like, how the hell are you doing what you're doing, man? This guy has built massive platforms. He writes a daily email. This guy writes a daily email for Daily Dad and Daily Stoic. He writes a monthly books that he's read email. He's putting out, he gave me the numbers. I can't remember what they are, but it's like 200 content pieces a day. And he has a huge YouTube channel all over all the platforms. And like everything's pretty good quality. At the same time, he's also owns a business and does talking and write books. So it's just like, how in the hell are you doing this? And he told me how he does it. When he creates content, he thinks of it as what's the show we're putting on here? This isn't his language. This is actually somebody else's language that I found talks about this. But they say, what's the show we're putting on here? And so every platform that they use, they ask that same question. What's the show we're putting on in this platform? Because what that allows you to do then is it allows you to create one larger piece of content. And if you know what individual shows it needs to go on, you can design that larger piece of content as individual modules that can be picked up and made specific for each show. So instead of having a podcast where I'm talking about a topic, I have a podcast or a large video or a big piece of writing or whatever it is, where I actually introduce each individual thing that I'm talking about with that hook, story, punch framework. So that each one, it can be one big thing, totally, but then each one can actually be cut out and used somewhere else. And so just as in example, I'll call it like a top 10 list. So go look at Ryan Holiday, go look at Daily Stoic, that YouTube channel, and go through their YouTube videos and find one that's like a top, whatever, like top 8 Stoic leadership virtues or whatever, right? And what you'll notice is actually the video is not one video that he recorded. It's a modular video, whereby he has an intro for each one that he creates individually for that piece of content. But then each of the virtues in this one example will have like its own like little header thing where it has some music behind it that clearly they've like cropped in, and then it pulls in a clip of a video from somewhere else. And you can tell that they're created at different times and sometimes radically different times. Like he'll have a video where you could tell that like one of the clips was from like Baby Ryan, like it had to be 10 plus years ago. Another clip is him on stage speaking. Another clip is him in the same scene as when he did the intro. So clearly he'd like filmed that one at the same time. And so what he has been doing over the past couple of years and what his team is trained to do has been to build out content, not as one thing, but every piece of content that he creates is an individual module that can be picked up and used in multiple places. And then what we're building out, and what I assume he has, is a tagging system in the back end. So I don't know what software we're using yet. I think Jennifer, who works with me on this, or is starting to work with me on this as a media manager, is building out the system. But each module, each piece, it might be call it a 5-minute thing where I'm talking about, I don't know, converting from Instagram, let's say. Well, that could be used as its own clip somewhere. That can be cut down by a video editing team to make specific for a TikTok or a YouTube short or a Facebook reel or an Instagram reel. And that same video can be used on all 4 of those things because it's kind of the same show, maybe a little bit different editing, but probably the same. But put different times, right? Like you're not going to post the same video to all 4. You're going to split them at different times. But then you tag that video as being marketing, conversion, whatever you're going to tag that video of. That way, over time, whatever you want to talk about, you can pull in that as one of the modules in your thing. Does that make sense? So that's how they do it, is they basically have massive libraries of content that they've created over the years that they've been systematic in creating so that they're individual pieces that can act on their own. And then they have a system where they tag them and store them so that ultimately, and this is what happens with Ryan, he doesn't even touch most of the pieces of content. He doesn't even have the logins to his social media, and he hasn't ever formatted one of his emails because his video team and his media management team know that this is how they do things. These are the modules that they're looking for. And they'll go to him and they'll be like, hey, we need an intro for a video on Stoic leadership virtues. And he'll sit down and he'll record the intro and he'll send it to them. And they'll grab 8 pieces from 8 other things that they've done that they have had tagged because this is a topic that they want to hit. And they put the video up. And he does the same thing with his emails. He'll write them and he'll write like blocks of stuff in a big Google Doc, or James Clear does something similar where James Clear uses Asana. And what he does for his, what does he call it? 3-2-1. Basically he has the Asana app and I've never used it. And he even says, he's like, I wouldn't recommend it. I just like kind of use it. But what he does then is he has the app on his phone, and every time he comes across something or thinks about something that could fit into a book that he's writing, like he has like a book as its own Asana thing and like the different chapters, or the 3-2-1 newsletter, so it comes across a quote or something he wants to think about, wherever he just pops open that app one time and puts it in the right like column. And then actually Lindsay Knuckles, who's like Greg Knuckles' wife, if anybody knows him, is basically James's like main employee. What they'll do then is they'll take that and they'll organize it and they'll put it in all the right places. And then when James actually writes his 3-2-1 emails, but then when he goes to write his email, he basically has this big list of ideas that he's captured all over the place that he just pops into this one app. And he just like effectively copies and pastes. Because what I like about this is that it's very clear in how it is executable over time. And then how it's just like, okay, here's the modules, here's what I do. And when you know that, it becomes much easier to identify a team and put them in the roles of what they're doing. So what Jennifer's doing with me now is she's building out the system for the capture of these things. The Obvious Choice podcast is actually going to become a daily podcast where it's going to have 2 longer episodes a week, probably 1 interview, 1 storytelling episode, and then the rest of them are going to be like 5 to 15 minute things. And what I'll do is I'll sit down at the beginning, you need to create more, but I'll sit down and I'll create like top 10s, for example. Those top 10s will be put as its own YouTube video edited. Those top 10s, each of the individual ones will be cut up into shorts, because the team will be able to cut up like a 2 or 3 minute thing into a short. And then each of the sections of that top 10 will be put as its own very short, quick hit podcast. And then at the same time, every single one of these will be built as a module, or will be tagged as a module and stored for later. And anytime that I do any live speaking or whatever it is, Jennifer and the video team that we end up hiring, we're trialing 3, will know that this is the system that they're capturing and tagging and putting material in. And so over time, you build this machine. So that's how it works. It's obviously a beast to get started, but if you've ever wondered, like, the behind the scenes of how the hell these people are doing this, that's how they're doing it. Any questions?
How do I get a whole team? Where's my team? That's what I need.
Yeah, I mean, you got to find a media manager. I think that's the key. Is the media manager. The other ones, the way that we're looking at it are contractor roles or outsourcing roles. So the media manager is basically the highway conductor. And that, I mean, that's a hard job. Like there's a lot of files flying back and forth, and like video files flying back and forth, which are just hard files to manage because they're just big. So find somebody who has because this person is going to need to identify things like headlines. They're probably going to need to be able to write relatively well. So somebody who has experience, some marketing acumen, experience writing, and is well organized. So I always look for people who have been in these types of roles before. So for example, how I found mine. Do you guys know the company Scribe Media? You ever heard about it? They were called Book in a Box for a while. But it was started by two of my friends, Tucker Max and Zach Obrant. And then they sold it and gave up the CEO, and the new CEO they put in was, he ran the company into the ground. Is what happened. And he's being sued by everybody. But part of what he did that was so bad was he was so egocentric, apparently, from everybody I know that worked there, was he was so obsessed with his own brand and his own ego and stuff like that, that he put all of the efforts onto like building his own name, and then like let the company collapse and like mismanage financially and everything. And so when the company collapsed, I reached out to a couple of friends of mine that were associated with it and asked who was his branding person. Because the fact that this person did because this guy was like heralded as this like top CEO, as this hero, basically right up until the day when you figured it was all fake, when you found out it was all fake. To me, that's even more impressive as a marketing job, knowing that it was a complete sham. I'm even more impressed with this woman. Right. And so that's who Jennifer is. So, when I look for people who have seemed to have done these types of roles before, and try to identify it. So are there folks that you know in your world who, I mean, if you like I know you work with a lot of doctors locally, like are any of them like branded really well? Ask them who they've worked with. They might be like, oh yeah, it was like my cousin. She's thinking of getting
I
into
get a
it.
lot of that.
So
It's my brother, sister's husband.
right. So then if you find somebody like that works a day job or something that shows that they're like pretty organized, they could be a good fit. I'm always looking. I don't care about resumes. Like people send me their resumes, I don't even look at them. I'm like, I don't know how to read this thing. It's irrelevant. I'm looking for people who have shown that they've already done the thing. Or shown that they have the skills that are kind of like the intangible skills also that I don't have. Like I'm just not organized. So, Amber well, I need people who are organized to work with. And that's something that, I mean, I think you can learn it to an extent, but I think some people are just naturally good conductors of a lot of pieces of information at a time, and others aren't. I'm not. I want to run to the garden bed over there and stick my head into it whenever I get a lot of moving pieces. That's how I go about, I don't know, solving those problems. Yeah, solving those problems. And then I just put people through trial projects. Like Jennifer and I worked on 3 different trial projects over 2 months. Got to go for coffee, then you go for dinner, then you have them overnight one time, then you decide to get into a relationship. I look at it as the same type of thing. So we're doing the same with these video companies, right? She's finding 3 video companies. We pay them all. Like I pay them for all these trial projects, but I'll give all three of them the same project, and we gauge them on communication, we gauge them on skill, we gauge them on reliability. Do they do what they say they're going to do when they say they're going to do it? With something like this, with creatives, that's pretty important. But it's not a quick process. I mean, you don't see this happening very often because it's hard. Well, this was fun and interesting. Thanks for hanging out. Hey, John back again, and I really hope that you enjoyed kind of listening in over the shoulder, I guess, on that call. I hope that you pulled a couple bits from it, juicy bits as well. If you're interested in talking to us about the online trainer mentorship, this is for trainers, nutritionists, gym owners, influencers already doing at least $1,000 a month online and wanting to scale up. If you're interested in talking about that, go to my Instagram, please, and send me a DM that says mentor, and we'll book a call, have a conversation about it. Now, I wanted to recommend another episode for you that I think is related to this and really important. You can listen to right now or save to listen to later. It's episode 147. It's called Good Information, Bad Advice. What you will find, what I have found, after spending a lot of time working online, is that there's a lot of good information out there that's good information for other people, but bad advice for you based off of your goals, based off of what you want to achieve. There's a lot of very smart people out there saying a lot of very smart things, but there's simply too much. And so in this episode, episode 147, you're going to learn kind of a framework of how to know who to listen to and what to listen to, kind of look past the flash, look past the glitz and glamour and whatever, and get down to the nuts and bolts of, is this going to help me? Right? There's nothing wrong with entertainment, but if we're doing something for our own self-development, we want to be focusing on stuff that's really going to further our self-development. If we're doing stuff for entertainment, we want to do stuff for entertainment, but they're two different things, and we need to separate those two. So have a listen. That's episode 147. It's called Good Information, Bad Advice. Hope that you love it. Hope you're good.